Imagine cruising at 40,000 feet aboard a gleaming private jet, where every whim is met before it's even spoken. Now, picture the unthinkable, seasoned flight attendant. Elise Monroe slaps the entitled son of a black billionaire Julian Braxton right across the face. In that heartbeat, the engines wind down, the cabin falls silent, and a quiet battle for dignity erupts on the tarmac. Who is this woman pushed beyond her breaking point? What hidden pressures and personal sacrifices drove her hand? And what happens when wealth, power, and systemic privilege collide with a single act of defiance? Set against the hushed luxury of LuxAir Private and the unyielding glare of social media. This is more than a story about one slap. It's an electric journey through injustice, resilience, and the unspoken bonds uniting service workers around the globe. As you dive into Elise's fight for respect from the hidden scars of past slights to a national movement that demands change, ask yourself, how far would you go to reclaim your worth? Ready to uncover every twist, every voice, and every truth. Hit like, share this video, and subscribe. Now let's take off. It didn't smell like an airport. It smelled like money. Old money, new money, curated, bottled, and piped through the vents of the Onyx terminal at Ashcroft Executive Airfield. The floors gleamed like water. The air was cool and deliberate. No overhead announcements, no TSA lines, just stillness, like the kind you'd find in an art gallery or a courtroom. In this place, flights didn't board. They awaited their passengers. Flight OX 118 was no exception. Parked like a silver falcon on the tarmac outside was the Falcon X9, a private jet with a wingspan longer than a subway train and a cabin wrapped in cream leather, mahogany, and silence. It had no tail logo, no commercial markings. It didn't need to advertise. People who flew LuxAir already knew. Inside the terminal, a woman in her mid-40s stood by Gate 3. She wore a Navy uniform, pressed sharp at the shoulders, a silk scarf looped neatly around her neck. Her name tag read Elise M. Her shoes were polished. Her hair pulled back in a soft, low bun. Her expression calm, almost serene. But her right hand trembled, barely visible as she sipped her lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. She wasn't nervous about flying. She had done over 2,000 flights in her 18 years at LuxAir Private. She knew every protocol, every safety drill, every checklist. What made her hand tremble was what the flight represented. Today's client was Julian Braxton, son of Victor Braxton, the billionaire CEO of Braxton Systems, the tech conglomerate that powered everything from voting machines to defense satellites. Victor Braxton wasn't just rich, he was influence personified. Power that didn't speak loudly because it never needed to speak at all. Julian was flying to the Caribbean, a celebratory trip, according to the manifest, post-launch party for their newest biometric AI. Elise had seen the name Braxton before. She'd worked flights for Victor himself, demanding, precise, and always silent. But Julian was different. Elise glanced at the crew tablet. Passenger list Julian Braxton, Zane Rush, 2 unidentified guests, female, listed as Brinley and Nova, no last names, no allergy notes, no medical flags, just VIP clearance. She adjusted her scarf, took another sip, checked the time, 7 minutes past the scheduled boarding. Nothing new. Elise moved to the window. The Falcon X9 was gleaming, coiled like a beast waiting to be unleashed. She could already hear it in her mind, the whir of startup, the click of belt buckles, the hum of champagne being poured. She used to love this part of the job, the anticipation, the dance of luxury and responsibility. But lately, the weight of keeping it all together, her bills, her teenage son Caleb's looming college tuition, the heater that had gone out twice last winter had begun to settle in her bones. It wasn't the job that exhausted her, it was the invisibility, the constant need to be perfectly pleasant while absorbing everyone else's chaos. Her phone buzzed in her blazer pocket. A text from Caleb. "Love you. Don't stress. You always got this." Elise smiled softly. She typed back a heart emoji and tucked the phone away. A low purr echoed across the tarmac. Then came the flash of matte black paint under sunlight. A custom Bentley SUV rolled up to the jet with glacial confidence. Two men stepped out first. Tall, thin, expensive. One of them, Zane, probably was already laughing into a phone call. Then Julian emerged. He was dressed in a sky-blue linen suit with no shirt underneath. Sunglasses the size of his ego, and a posture that screamed untouchable. He looked exactly how you'd expect someone raised on private schools, private jets, and private getaways to look polished, vacant, and slightly bored. Behind him, Brinley and Nova climbed out, their heels clacking lightly on the concrete. They wore matching swimsuits under see-through designer wraps, giggling as if nothing in the world could possibly touch them. Elise stepped forward, her smile practiced but warm. "Good afternoon. Mr. Braxton, welcome aboard LuxAir." Julian didn't look at her. He walked past, phone in hand, voice flat. "Where's the champagne?" Zane followed, nodding once at Elise as if she were a door greeter at a luxury mall. The women didn't acknowledge her at all. Elise closed her eyes for a breath. It begins. Inside the aircraft. The pre-flight checks had been completed. Co-pilot Jenkins gave her a thumbs up from the cockpit. Captain Miranda Keller was reviewing the flight plan. Elise helped the guests settle in, placing their custom luggage, yes, of course, one piece each from the rarest Hermes collection in the overheads. Julian dropped himself into a seat and sprawled across two more, already filming a selfie video with Zane. Elise delivered a silver tray with towels and welcome drinks. "Ms. Elise," Julian said suddenly, as if trying her name on like a new jacket. "Let's skip the little show. Yeah, just tell the pilot wheels up in 10. She replied with a soft smile. "Of course, sir. I'll just need to run through a brief safety protocol before takeoff." Julian sighed deeply. "We've flown LuxAir a dozen times. We know where the life vests are." Zane snickered. Brinley and Nova sipped their rosé. Elise kept her tone light. "It's required by FAA regulation, and part of our commitment to your safety, Mr. Braxton." "I'll be quick." Julian finally looked at her. It wasn't a gaze, it was a challenge. A flicker of something passed between them. He blinked first. "Fine. Do your thing." Elise turned and began the demo. Voice even, measured, but inside, something twisted. She could feel it. This flight was going to be different. There was a storm inside the plane, and it hadn't even left the ground. And she knew it wouldn't be weather that grounded them. It would be something else. Something much more human. Something that was about to explode. Elise Monroe believed in details, not the flashy kind, not designer labels or custom stitching or the way wealth left fingerprints on silk. No, Elise believed in the quiet details, the ones no one else noticed. The way a passenger gripped the seatbelt too tightly, the rhythm of someone's breath when turbulence hit, the way silence could scream louder than shouting. It was why she'd lasted so long in the skies. 18 years, 5 airlines, 2 continents, one life split into 2 halves before him. And before Terrence Monroe passed, she was a schoolteacher's wife. She'd worked part-time at a flower shop in East Orange. She packed lunches, ironed shirts, organized church raffles. She never thought about flying until the day he collapsed in their driveway. Massive heart attack. 46 years old. Their son, Caleb, was 9. After the funeral, the school insurance paid out just enough to cover the house for a year. But Caleb still needed shoes, food, a future. Elise needed something more than survival. She needed reinvention. Flight school wasn't glamorous, it was grueling. The hours were long, the uniforms stiff, the passengers difficult. But Elise didn't flinch. Her poise, her voice, her eyes always steady. That's what made her perfect for LuxAir. She wasn't there to entertain. She was there to ensure comfort, safety, and serenity. She became the person others looked toward when things went sideways, but even steel bends when enough pressure builds. Back at Ashcroft Executive Airfield, the jet was now fully loaded. Julian Braxton lounged with his sunglasses still on inside the cabin. Brinley and Nova were arguing about which influencer was more fake. Zane was tapping furiously on his phone, probably live-streaming the pre-flight aesthetic for the thousands who tuned in for his every yawn. Elise stood in the galley, invisible but observing. The door was still open. She heard the hum of the tarmac, smelled the faint chemical trace of jet fuel. This was the calm, but not peace. She touched her necklace, a thin silver chain with a single charm, a miniature compass. It had been Terrence's. He used to say, even when the sky looks the same in every direction, you gotta know what matters. That's your true north. She had followed that compass through years of silence, through hundreds of microaggressions and quiet humiliations, passengers who assumed she didn't understand French, executives who handed her their trash without looking at her face, women who clutched their handbags tighter when she reached for their coats, but she never lost her grace. Until now, she had always chosen calm. But today, the air felt different. It wasn't just the disrespect. It was the edge of something deeper. Money didn't just protect these people, it emboldened them. Julian Braxton had grown up in a world where rules bent to his presence, where doors opened without knocks, where consequences were theoretical. She knew the type. She'd flown them before, from hedge fund heirs with too much whiskey in their veins to senators' sons who thought the word no was negotiable. She'd smoothed down skirts while being ogled, diffused tantrums with a smile, wiped vomit off $10,000 rugs without blinking. Not because she enjoyed it, but because she had a mortgage, because Caleb had dreams, because her pride had always taken a back seat to her responsibilities. Still, lately she wondered, what would happen if she stopped being the buffer between power and consequence? She looked out the window again. Her reflection blinked back, just a few feet behind her. The passengers laughed. Nova had propped her bare feet on the polished mahogany table. Julian had kicked off his designer loafers, letting one land sideways under the cream leather seat. Brinley was filming a slow-motion toast with her rosé, her lips pursed into a perfect influencer pout. Elise took a deep breath and turned around. This flight wasn't long, 3 hours and 25 minutes, direct to St. Lucia. She could handle that. But the issue wasn't the destination. It was the turbulence that had nothing to do with weather. As she began the final walkthrough before takeoff, Captain Miranda Keller stepped out of the cockpit, late 40s, no nonsense, always clipped in speech. She gave Elise a glance that only veteran crew could decipher. It said, "Keep it tight. I don't trust this group." Elise gave a single nod in return. Once the safety checks were confirmed, the door would close. Then it would be just them and the sky, no cameras, no witnesses, and when arrogance climbs high enough, it often thinks it's untouchable. Elise placed the silver tray of pre-takeoff drinks on the table. Champagne flutes with chilled Dom Perignon, polished crystal, no fingerprints. Julian didn't say thank you. He never had. Instead, he looked up at her, smirking. "You look tired. Elise, maybe you should get some rest." Zane snorted. Elise didn't flinch. "Let me know if you need anything else before we depart. Mr. Braxton." He waved her away like a waiter. Back in the galley, she steadied herself against the counter. She ran through her mental list, cabin pressure checked, emergency exit briefing done, passenger head count 4, altitude forecast smooth, mental stability questionable. She thought of Caleb again, the way he used to build paper planes out of her old training manuals, how he once asked, "Why do you like the sky?" "Mom," she told him then, "because up there, no one gets to own it." She had believed that once. She wasn't so sure anymore. The intercom pinged softly. Miranda's voice came through. "Final checks. Elise, we're clear for door close in 5. "Copy that," Elise replied, her voice calm. She stepped back into the main cabin. The noise hit her like a perfume chatter. Phone alerts, laughter, artificial and endless. Nova turned and asked, "Can I get some cashews? I'm starving." Elise paused. "Of course, but before I serve them, I do need to confirm. Does anyone on board have any nut allergies?" A standard question, one she'd asked 1,000 times. Julian didn't even lift his head. "Nope. We're all good. Bring the nuts. I'll just need verbal confirmation from each passenger." "Per flight protocol," Elise said, voice soft but steady, "especially with nuts involved. We want to be safe." Zane groaned. Brinley rolled her eyes. Julian snapped his gaze toward her. "I said we're fine." Elise nodded, but turned to Nova. "Ma'am, just want to be absolutely sure. Cashews, almonds, and pistachios are in the mix." Nova looked startled for a second, then smiled quickly. "Oh, I'm good. No allergies." But there was something in her voice, a hesitation. Elise's stomach tightened. It wasn't the answer. It was the delay. She'd seen it before. Someone too shy to speak up, embarrassed, afraid of holding up the group. Julian's voice cut through the moment. "Seriously, are you hard of hearing? I said we're fine." Elise kept her eyes on Nova. "I just need clarity." "Ma'am, it's standard." That's when Julian stood, all 6 feet of inherited authority. He took a step closer. "You don't get to question us. You're staff, not security, not a doctor, not anything." He grinned. "Now, get the nuts and shut the hell up." It was said so quietly, so efficiently. It didn't even echo. It just sliced. Elise stood frozen. Inside her chest, something stirred. Not rage, something older, deeper, exhaustion laced with principle. Her fingers tightened against her side. Her mind raced Caleb, the house, her job, the risks. Her body said, "Stay calm." Her heart said no. And just like that, the tension stretched like glass, about to shatter. She didn't know it then, but in less than 5 minutes, that silence would break. And when it did, no one would ever forget. The door closed with a hydraulic hiss. It was the kind of sound Elise had heard so many times before, but today it rang differently. It didn't feel routine. It felt like a seal being pressed down over something volatile, like the lid on a pressure cooker. Inside the Falcon X-9, the cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft switched to internal power. The gentle hum of the systems came alive. The jet, magnificent and still, sat poised for takeoff. But Elise Monroe had a different hum inside her. Not mechanical, emotional. She could feel it in her fingertips, the quiet vibration of restraint beginning to thin. Julian Braxton had made himself at home, sprawled across 2 seats, legs wide, phone in hand. He was recording something again, maybe for his followers, or maybe just to amuse himself. His voice drifted through the air like perfume. All right, team, private jet vibes only, champagne's flowing. Shout out to LuxAir for the upgrade. We out here. Zane leaned in from across the aisle, holding up 2 fingers in a lazy peace sign, adding, "Zero turbulence, just cashmere clouds." The women, Brinley and Nova, posed in the background, adjusting their oversized sunglasses and pursing their lips like trained models. Elise watched the scene unfold, her training keeping her smile fixed even as her stomach tightened. She walked through the aisle with her final pre-flight checks. Every detail mattered. Overhead compartments secured, tray tables flush, emergency lighting tested. She did it all without thinking, her body moving on muscle memory, while her thoughts spiraled somewhere far more complicated. She thought of Caleb again. He would be at home right now, probably finishing up his online algebra homework, headphones in, hoodie up. He had a quiet way about him, sharp, like his father, but emotionally intuitive in a way Elise both admired and feared. He noticed things, not just what people said, but what they didn't. He had noticed her distance lately, the long silences at dinner, the fatigue around her eyes, the way she sometimes stared at the floor too long before answering a question. He'd once asked her, gently, "Mom, are you okay, or are you just pretending to be okay?" That question haunted her, because the truth was, she didn't know anymore. She moved toward the cockpit. Captain Miranda Keller stood reviewing their route on the tablet screen, brows tight with thought. "You all right?" Keller asked without looking up. "I'm fine," Elise replied. Too quickly, Miranda turned to her. "You sure this group's all ready?" Loud. Elise exhaled slowly, then nodded. "They'll sleep once we're in the air." Keller gave a skeptical grunt. "I'll have the co-pilot double-check our flight plan. We might have some headwind. I want to get altitude fast." "Copy that." Elise turned back to the cabin and resumed her walk. She stopped just behind Julian's seat, waiting to deliver the final safety briefing. He didn't look up. "Make it fast," he muttered, still watching his phone. Elise nodded, stepped forward, and began the briefing. Her voice was gentle, but clear, calm, but firm. She explained the seatbelt protocol, the oxygen masks, the location of the exits. None of the passengers looked up, not one. Nova chewed gum absently while checking her lip gloss. Zane had his AirPods in. Julian was mid-text. Brinley yawned dramatically and stretched her legs. Elise finished the announcement. Not a single word of acknowledgement followed. She had once prided herself on the dignity she brought to this job, the ability to serve without servitude. But these past 2 years had chipped at something inside her, the entitlement, the casual cruelty, the erosion of decency disguised as influence. She turned to the galley and began preparing the drinks. As the bottles clinked softly, her mind returned to her first ever flight. She remembered how nervous she had been, how carefully she had practiced her tone, her posture, her smile. She remembered how Terrence had driven her to the airport that morning, stopping twice along the way so she could breathe and not throw up. He had held her hand and said, "Elise, you don't need to be perfect. Just be clear. Just be calm. That's your gift." It had carried her for almost 2 decades, until now. Julian's voice sliced through her thoughts. "Hey, can we get the real champagne now? Not this knockoff. You guys used to have the '01 Krug." What happened? Elise stepped back into the aisle with a tray. "We're currently serving Dom Perignon, Mr. Braxton. If you'd prefer something else, I can check with the galley supply." He laughed like she'd made a joke. Zane reached for a flute, missing and nearly knocking it over. Whoops, too early for turbulence. Brinley rolled her eyes. "You're such a disaster. Zad." Nova giggled. Elise caught the glass before it tipped, placing it back with a precision that made it look easy. She adjusted the napkin under it, then offered a tight smile. "No turbulence yet," she said softly. "Just a bit of imbalance." Julian looked at her then. Actually looked. His expression changed. It wasn't anger. It was curiosity, as if he had suddenly realized that the woman serving him champagne had a mind, and that bothered him. "You've got a little attitude today." "Elise," he said, "something you want to get off your chest." Elise felt her heart thump. Just once, hard. She said nothing. Julian held her gaze, then smirked. "Didn't think so." Zane chuckled under his breath. Elise turned back to the galley without a word. The cabin dimmed a bit more, engines humming steadily. The co-pilot's voice came through the intercom. "Flight LX-118, we've been cleared for taxi. Cabin crew, prepare for departure." Elise took her jump seat, locked her harness, and folded her hands in her lap. As the jet began to move, something inside her felt still. Too still. This wasn't turbulence. This was something else. A silence that was growing teeth. In a few minutes, they'd be in the air, and something would break. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she could feel it, deep down, beneath the uniform, the years of discipline, the 100 masks she'd worn. She knew. This flight would not be like the others, and by the time it was over, nothing would be the same. The wheels rolled gently over the tarmac, the low vibration humming through the soles of Elise Monroe's feet as she stood in the galley, preparing the second round of drinks. The Falcon X-9 moved like a shadow across the runway, smooth, confident, silent. Everything on the surface looked flawless. Inside the cabin, however, something sharp was coiling. The kind of energy Elise had come to recognize over time. Not turbulence, not weather. Something worse. Disrespect. It started subtly, as it always did. A sarcastic comment here, a sideways glance there. The unmistakable sound of someone laughing at you, not with you. Elise had been in enough high-altitude rooms to know when someone believed they were above the rules, above her. She carefully placed 4 flutes onto a silver tray. The chilled bottle of Dom Perignon sat on the counter behind her, its label catching the soft underlighting of the galley. She wiped a faint smudge from one glass with the edge of a cloth napkin. Precision was armor, even now. She stepped back into the cabin. Julian Braxton was reclined, one leg over the armrest, sunglasses still on despite the dimmed lights. He hadn't stopped filming since takeoff clearance had been granted. His voice floated through the cabin. "All right, Jet Set fam. This is what it's all about. Shout out to my pops for the wings." Zane gave a whoop in the background. Nova leaned into Julian's shoulder, her lips pressed into a practiced pout. Elise smiled politely and approached with the tray. Would anyone like a second round? Zane reached first, his fingers brushing hers as he took the glass. "Now we're talking," he said. Julian took his glass without acknowledging her presence. Brinley and Nova followed suit. Elise nodded and began to turn when Nova called after her. "Oh, and can we get some more of those mixed nuts? The ones in the bowl were amazing." Elise paused mid-step. She turned back, her expression unchanged. "Of course. Before I do, I just need to confirm, does anyone on board have any food allergies, specifically to nuts, cashews, almonds, and pistachios are in the mix?" Zane rolled his eyes. "We're not 5-year-olds. Julian made a sound between a scoff and a chuckle. "Seriously, we've flown LuxAir dozens of times. No one's died yet." Elise remained calm. "I understand, sir. It's just standard procedure. FAA safety protocol requires verbal confirmation for all potential allergens." Julian leaned forward slightly. "You really think someone on this jet is going to drop dead from a peanut? Just bring the damn snacks." She didn't flinch. "I'll just need to confirm verbally from each passenger for the record." Zane tossed back the rest of his champagne with a dramatic sigh. "This is ridiculous." Nova glanced down at her phone and muttered, "No allergies here." Brinley said nothing, just shook her head dismissively. Julian's jaw tensed. He turned to Elise, took off his sunglasses, and locked eyes with her for the first time that day. "Listen, my father pays more in taxes per day than you've made in your entire career. You're not a nurse, you're not a cop, you're a hostess in the sky, and if I say we're fine, then we're fine." His voice was low and deliberate, each word sharpened by entitlement. Elise's hands tightened slightly around the tray. She turned to Nova again. "Ma'am, just to be safe, are you absolutely certain some passengers react to specific types of nuts? If there's any uncertainty, I can bring you a non-allergen snack." Nova hesitated. It was brief, less than a second, but Elise saw it. A flicker. A tiny moment where Nova's confidence faltered. The pause was enough. Julian slammed his palm down on the armrest, the sound startlingly loud in the confined cabin. "For God's sake, are you deaf or just desperate to be relevant? She said she's fine. You're not a doctor. You're not even important. You're just a lady who brings drinks." The words sliced the air. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Zane laughed awkwardly. Nova pulled her feet off the table. Brinley looked at her phone, pretending not to hear. Elise didn't move. She stared at Julian, expression unreadable. Behind her eyes, something stirred, a ripple beneath the calm, 15 years of compliance, of enduring without complaint, of biting her tongue so hard she sometimes tasted blood. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was exhausted, and exhaustion was often the fuse beneath fire. She placed the tray down on the side console, each movement slow, intentional. "Mr. Braxton," she said softly, "my job is not just to serve drinks. It's to ensure the safety of everyone on this flight, regardless of their last name or net worth." Julian leaned back in his seat, eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "Oh, safety?" From the nuts, Elise took one step forward. "From assumptions," she said, "which, at this altitude, can kill. Julian smirked. It was the smirk that did it. A curl of the lip, a glint in the eye, the expression of a man who had never been told no, who had never been corrected without recourse, who believed that the world and everyone in it was placed here to orbit him. Elise felt the shift inside her. She had always believed in restraint and given grace even when none was given to her. But in that moment, something cracked. She saw his smirk, and behind it, every moment of casual cruelty she had ever swallowed. Every passenger who'd spoken over her, every supervisor who told her to smile more, every man who assumed her silence meant submission, and, before she could think, her hand moved. It wasn't a slap of rage. It was precise, controlled, a clean arc. The sound echoed flat and sharp as her palm connected with the side of Julian Braxton's face. The cabin went still. So quiet. Elise could hear the faint buzz of the air vents. Julian sat frozen, eyes wide, one hand slowly rising to touch the red mark blooming across his cheek. Zane's mouth hung open. Brinley let out a breath like she'd been punched. Nova covered her mouth with both hands. Elise stood where she was, chest rising and falling in tight, measured breaths. Her hand tingled, her heart raced, her body told her to apologize, to run, to shrink, but something deeper told her to stand still. Julian lowered his hand and reached for his phone. He tapped the screen once. "Dad," he said, voice low, flat. "It's me." A pause. "She just hit me. The flight attendant, yes, right across the face." He looked at Elise, his eyes narrowing. "We're still on the tarmac. Ashcroft, flight LX 118. Another pause, then a slight smile. "Thanks." He ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. "You have no idea what you've just done," he whispered. Elise didn't answer. The jet's engines, which had been humming gently, began to slow, and then came the voice of Captain Miranda Keller over the intercom. "Flight attendants, cabin secure, all passengers remain in your seats. We are holding our position on the tarmac." The jet had been grounded, not because of weather, not because of air traffic, because of a single slap, and a family that controlled the skies. The hum of the engines faded to a mechanical sigh. The cabin lights flickered as the Falcon X-9 dropped out of takeoff mode and into a sudden, eerie stillness. The jet wasn't moving, not an inch. On the tarmac at Ashcroft Executive Airfield, the world had frozen, and Elise Monroe stood at the center of it all. Her hand still tingled, not from pain, but from shock. It had moved faster than thought. Years of control undone in a single motion, a slap, 1 second of contact that held within it every insult, every silent indignity, every moment of invisible labor. Julian Braxton sat motionless, eyes fixed on her. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't moving. That was what made it worse. He simply stared, one cheek already pinkening beneath perfect skin, his lips tight, his breathing controlled. The boy who thought himself untouchable had just been touched. Elise's pulse throbbed behind her ears. She could feel her lungs fighting for rhythm. She wanted to sit down. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to rewind time by 30 seconds and do everything differently. But mostly, she wanted to keep standing. The silence in the jet was thick. Zane Rush looked like a statue, still holding his champagne glass midair. Nova's fingers hovered over her lips. Brinley blinked slowly, as if trying to process whether what she saw actually happened. Elise met no one's gaze. She backed slowly into the galley and closed the half-curtain behind her. A single, fragile barrier between her and the chaos. Her thoughts raced. What now? What have I done? What will this cost me? But beneath those questions, another voice whispered louder. Why did it feel like the truth? Why did it feel like the first real thing she'd done in years? Through the thin curtain, she could hear Julian speaking again. His tone was calm now, measured, almost polite. He had made the call already, to his father, to Victor Braxton, to the Empire, and it had taken less than a minute for the entire plane to shut down. Captain Miranda Keller appeared in the aisle a moment later, summoned from the cockpit by the halt order. Her face was unreadable. She looked at Julian's expression. She looked at Elise's absence. Then she turned toward the galley. "Elise," she called, voice sharp. Elise stepped out, hands folded in front of her. "In my cockpit? Now." She followed without a word. Inside the cockpit, First Officer Derek Kim sat in silence, pretending to review a checklist he had already completed. Miranda shut the door behind them. "What happened?" she asked. Elise inhaled. "Slowly, I struck a passenger." The words felt like glass coming out of her throat. Miranda blinked, her mouth tightening. Why? He was verbally abusive, dismissive. He refused to follow safety protocol regarding allergy confirmation. I asked again, and he responded with escalating hostility. I lost control. "Did he touch you?" "No." Miranda nodded once, then crossed her arms. "Well, this is going to be a disaster." "I know. Not just for you." Elise looked down. The radio in the cockpit crackled. A message from ground control. Miranda reached for her headset, nodded slowly, then took it off. That was the tower. "We've been instructed not to move. No taxi clearance, no gate return. Just hold." "They're boxing us in," Elise said quietly. "They're going to make an example out of someone," Miranda replied. "And it's not going to be the billionaire's kid." "I understand." Miranda studied her for a long time. "Elise, I've flown with you for years. I've seen you work through turbulence, mid-air medicals, goddamn engine fire. But this," her voice broke slightly, "this might be it." "I know," Elise whispered. Miranda exhaled. "Go to the rear galley. Do not interact with the passengers. Do not speak. You are on ice until further notice." Elise nodded once and walked back. Each step felt heavier than the last. The passengers watched her return. Silent now. Julian sat still, his arms crossed, his cheek still faintly red. His phone was in his lap, screen dark. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't have to. The jet cabin felt colder now. The climate hadn't changed, but everything else had. Elise moved to the back galley and shut herself in. She stood facing the counter, hands braced on the metal surface, her reflection warping in the polished steel. She thought of Caleb. She imagined him getting a call from a friend, seeing a news headline, hearing about it through whispers before hearing it from her. She had always told him to hold his head high. What would he think now? What if she had just destroyed their entire future? Outside, on the tarmac, a new sound grew louder. Not jet engines, but wheels. Vehicles, fast, powerful. Through the window, Captain Keller spotted them first. 2 black SUVs, tinted windows, government plates. Except these weren't government officials. They were Braxton men. The door opened. A man stepped inside, tall and composed, dressed in a tailored dark suit with a silver lapel pin. He didn't wear sunglasses. His eyes were the weapon. He walked like he owned the air. "Julian," he said, his voice calm. "Arthur," Julian replied, almost relaxed now. "Arthur Voss, Victor Braxton's personal attorney, the fixer. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was the kind of man who erased headlines before they printed, who turned lawsuits into NDAs, who made careers vanish like condensation." Arthur turned toward Captain Keller. "My name is Arthur Voss, on behalf of Mr. Braxton. I'm taking custody of your crew member. This incident will be handled privately." Miranda didn't blink. "Mr. Voss, I'm filing a full incident report with the FAA. That's non-negotiable." "You're free to file what you like," Arthur said, pulling out a leather folder, "but you'll also receive a confidentiality agreement from LuxAir's executive office within the hour. I suggest you read it before making any statements to the press." Arthur turned to one of the guards behind him. "Escort Ms. Monroe from the aircraft. Secure her personal belongings. Do not speak to her." Elise emerged as they opened the rear galley door. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. The two men moved like shadows, lifting her crew bag, her purse, her ID badge. They flanked her as she stepped out of the plane. As she passed Julian, she looked at him one last time. He raised his glass slightly. Smirk returned. "Should have just brought the nuts," he murmured. Outside, the wind had picked up. The flashing lights from the SUVs danced across the fuselage of the Falcon X-9. Elise descended the stairs slowly, each step surreal. The tarmac smelled like fuel, heat, and humiliation. She got into the back of the black vehicle, the door closing with a soft, sinister click. They didn't take her to a police station. They took her somewhere worse. A legal conference room, anonymous, beige walls, a single table, no windows, no clock. She sat alone for almost an hour. When the door finally opened, two people entered. Brenda from LuxAir Human Resources, and a man she had never seen before, corporate counsel. Judging by the way he didn't smile, Brenda looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Elise," she began softly, "we need to talk about what happened." The man took over. "You're being terminated immediately for misconduct. Assaulting a passenger is grounds for legal action. We will not press charges if you sign this NDA." He slid a thick contract across the table. "You may not speak to the press. You may not speak about this flight, Mr. Braxton, or any client of LuxAir, ever. In exchange, you'll receive 2 months' pay, and we won't fight your unemployment." Elise looked at the paper, looked at the pen, and then looked at them both. She asked quietly, "And if I don't sign," the man didn't hesitate, "we'll sue. You'll lose. You'll be blacklisted from every airline. And Mr. Braxton will pursue civil charges. He has the means. Do you?" Brenda looked away. Elise sat in silence, and then she reached forward, not for the pen, but to push the contract back across the table. "I'm not signing," she said. The room fell silent. "Then you'll lose everything," the lawyer said coldly. "Maybe," Elise replied, standing up, "but at least I'll still have myself." And with that, she walked out, not just of the room, but into war. The doors behind Elise Monroe closed with a soft, final thud, shutting her out from the only career she had known. Outside, the sun dipped behind the hangars at Ashcroft Executive Airfield, casting long shadows across the tarmac. The Falcon X-9 remained frozen in place, engines now fully silent, windows darkened, inside the SUV. Elise sat motionless, hands folded on her lap. Her crew bag was beside her, stripped of badge and clearance. No one spoke, not the driver, not the security officer next to her. They didn't look at her, and she didn't look at them. There was a strange kind of dignity in the silence. No questions, no explanations, just the quiet certainty that something irreversible had happened. She thought about the slap, again and again, not the physical movement, not the sting on her palm, but what it meant. She had broken something, not just protocol, not just a rule, but an unspoken contract, the one that said people like her don't touch people like him. The SUV drove past the terminal she knew so well, past Gate 3 where she'd stood 100 times with a practiced smile, past the concierge station where the staff were trained to anticipate desire before it was voiced, past the glossy walls and velvet silence of LuxAir's Onyx Wing, where money wasn't just currency, it was the atmosphere itself. As the jet slipped out of view, Elise felt something unexpected. Relief, not from the consequences. They were still coming. But from the weight she'd carried for so long, she had done the unthinkable. Yes. But she had also done the thing no one else dared. She had said no. The car turned down a side road and pulled into a nondescript office building with tinted glass and a manicured parking lot. No signs, no branding, just neutral corporate silence. Inside, she was led to a small holding room with a frosted glass door and a long gray table. Water bottles waited in the center, unopened. A surveillance camera blinked quietly in the corner. Then they left her. No phone, no watch, no window, no noise. For over an hour. She sat there, staring at the grain of the table's laminate. In the stillness, her thoughts turned to Caleb. Would he hear about it at school, on social media? Would someone whisper it into his ear like a secret weapon? She pictured his face. Not angry, but confused. "Mom, you slapped someone." The memory of his voice cracked something in her chest. She had raised him to believe in calm, in thinking before reacting, and turning the other cheek. Not because she was weak, but because she'd learned the cost of fighting battles you couldn't afford to lose. But now the fight had chosen her. The door opened. Two people entered: Brenda, the exhausted HR manager from LuxAir, and a lawyer Elise didn't recognize. He was tall, clean-shaven, with silver cufflinks and a thin patience. Brenda avoided her eyes. The lawyer didn't bother. "Elise," he began, "as we discussed earlier, this incident is not something LuxAir takes lightly." She said nothing. "You've been with the company nearly 2 decades. Your file is exemplary, but you crossed a line." "Because I defended myself?" she asked softly. "No," he replied. "Because you laid hands on a passenger. That's the part that matters." He opened a folder and pushed a stack of papers toward her. "This is a non-disclosure agreement. In exchange for signing it, you'll receive 2 months of severance. LuxAir will not contest your unemployment claim. We won't press charges. And Mr. Braxton has agreed conditionally not to pursue criminal action." Elise looked at the papers, then at Brenda. Brenda finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you don't sign, they'll come after you hard." "Will they?" Elise asked, eyes narrowing. The lawyer interjected smoothly. "Yes, you'll be sued. Civil charges, maybe criminal. You'll be portrayed as unstable, aggressive. There will be stories, witnesses, affidavits. You will lose, and you will owe." Elise stared at the text on the first page. A single line bolded near the top. The employee agrees never to discuss or disclose any information related to Flight LX-118 LuxAir Private, or the Braxton family. It wasn't just a legal document, it was erasure. They weren't just firing her, they were making her disappear. The lawyer pushed the pen toward her. You sign now, you walk away quietly, or you become a headline for all the wrong reasons. Elise's hands remained still. She thought about the years, the passengers she'd helped during panic attacks at 35,000 feet, the mother who went into labor midair, the time she stayed overnight with a child whose nanny got detained on landing. None of that mattered. One mistake, one powerful name, and it all vanished. She closed the folder. I'm not signing. The air changed. Brenda looked up in shock. The lawyer leaned back, suddenly more predator than professional. Elise, if you think public sympathy will protect you, I don't, she interrupted. But I know what silence costs. You won't win this. I don't need to win, she said. I just need the truth to exist. The lawyer gathered the papers. Then prepare yourself. You're going to lose everything. Elise stood up. I already did. She said, that's why I'm not afraid. And with that, she walked out of the room, down the hall, out into the New Jersey air. No job, no paycheck, no protection, but something had shifted in her spine. Not pride, conviction. She didn't take a cab. She walked 4 blocks until she reached a gas station and called a rideshare from a borrowed phone. The driver didn't ask questions. He simply drove her home, where the world hadn't yet learned what happened. Her house was still standing, the lights were still on, and Caleb was at the kitchen table, finishing his homework. Hey, Mom, he said, not looking up. You're early. Elise kissed the top of his head and whispered, yeah, early this time. He looked up, sensing something. You okay? Elise forced a smile, then let it fade. I don't know yet, she said honestly, but I will be. Later that night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed once, then again, then again. She picked it up, missed calls, texts, links, a video. She clicked play. It was grainy, shaky, filmed through the tinted window of a catering truck on the tarmac. You couldn't hear words, but you saw the slap. You saw Julian's head snap to the side. You saw Elise's stillness. Then you saw her being escorted off the plane. A headline underneath blinked, Flight Attendant Assaults Billionaire's Son. Jet grounded at Ashcroft. Elise closed her eyes. It had begun, but not in the way they expected, because in the dark corners of the internet, in places where workers whispered to one another, the truth had already found oxygen, and someone out there was going to light a match. The video spread faster than anyone expected. By the time Elise Monroe woke the next morning, it had been reposted on 5 different platforms. It had no caption, no context, just that single moment, recorded at a distance. Elise's hand slicing through the air, Julian Braxton's head snapping sideways, and her frozen expression in the seconds after. She stared at it on her phone. The 30-second clip looped again and again. No audio, no explanation, just action, and it was enough. The comments were mixed at first. Did he deserve it? She's done. Powerful. Grace and anger. Entitlement meets consequence. She's going to get destroyed. She scrolled until she found one comment that stayed with her. She didn't slap him. She carried every flight attendant's exhaustion in her hand. Caleb came out of his room with headphones around his neck, eyes wary. You okay? Mom Elise nodded, then shook her head, then shrugged. I don't know. He sat next to her at the table. I saw it. Everyone did. At school. It's all over, Snap. Even some teachers are whispering. I didn't want this, she said. I know. I didn't plan it. You didn't have to. They sat in silence. Then he asked the question she hadn't yet been ready for. What are you going to do? She didn't answer, because the truth was, she didn't know. An hour later, her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Elise Monroe. Yes, this is Marisa Chen with Public Radio. I'm reaching out to request your side of the story regarding the Braxton flight. You've been identified as the attendant in the now viral video. I'm not commenting. Elise said immediately, I understand, but I'd like to offer you something different. Not a headline, not a scandal, a conversation. We're doing a segment on the emotional cost of service work. What you did, whether people agree with it or not, has touched a nerve. Elise hesitated. Please, Marisa said gently, even if it's off the record, even if it's just to hear your voice. Elise ended the call without answering. She wasn't ready, not yet, but the world wasn't going to wait. By noon, she had 3 more voicemails, a legal blog offering pro bono support, a union rep asking for a callback, a woman from Detroit who simply said, I saw you, and I get it, and I hope you're okay. That night, a letter was slid under her door, no stamp, no return address. Inside 2 pages, typed, the LuxAir executive office had escalated. The letter accused her of breaching confidentiality, of inciting defamation against a high-profile passenger, and of violating her employment agreement. It was the first formal warning, but it wouldn't be the last. 2 days later, it came, a lawsuit, filed in Superior Court, Braxton v. Monroe, accusations of assault, emotional distress, damages to reputation, interference with business relationships. It wasn't just Julian's name on the documents, it was Victor Braxton's, too, the full force of their empire. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to crush her. She stared at the papers in disbelief. This wasn't a warning anymore. It was war. Elise sat in her living room, sunlight slanting across the floor, documents in her lap. Her lawyer, an old friend from Terrence's union days, reviewed the papers with a frown. They're hitting hard, he said. They're going to frame this as a case of dangerous behavior, a public servant gone rogue. You struck a man in a controlled environment. They're going to say it's grounds for federal concern. Can we fight it? We can try. But they'll bury you in motions, filings, PR attacks. This isn't about justice. It's about pressure. They want you to give up. I won't. He looked at her, surprised. Why? Because they want me to vanish. He leaned back. That's brave. But bravery gets expensive. She nodded. I'll find a way. And she did. She pulled old boxes from the attic. Savings, her late husband's insurance payout, the small remainder she'd held on to for Caleb's college fund. It wasn't enough for a legal war, but it was enough to stall. Then came the email. Anonymous sender. Subject line. He's done this before. Attached a single PDF, an internal complaint, dated 2 years prior, filed by a LuxAir employee, accusing Julian Braxton of verbal abuse, intimidation, and inappropriate touching on a flight from Los Angeles to Teterboro. It had been buried. No formal investigation, no HR follow-up, no suspension, nothing. Elise stared at the document, her hands trembling. It was real, and someone inside had given it to her. A spark lit in her chest. The next morning, she called Marisa Chen. "I'm ready to talk." Elise said Marisa didn't waste time. She arranged a private meeting at a community co-working space, far from the cameras, the microphones, the frenzy. Elise showed up early. Marisa arrived with only a notepad and a warm smile. "Off the record," she said. Elise nodded, and she began to speak. Not about the slap, but about everything that came before it. The years of disrespect, the dismissive glances, the passengers who assumed she didn't speak English, the men who touched her arm without permission, the women who handed her their babies like she was a nanny, the billionaire heir who barked orders at her as if she were a servant in a private castle at 40,000 feet. By the time she finished, Marisa wasn't writing. She was just listening. "You're not alone," she said softly, "but I'm still the one being sued," Elise replied. Marissa's gaze sharpened. Not for long. 2 days later, the story aired. The Cost of Calm. When service meets power at 30,000 feet. It wasn't sensational. It wasn't scandal. It was a human voice. Elise's voice. And it resonated. Emails poured in. Messages from other attendants, pilots, cleaners, catering staff, people who had held their tongues for years. Now, someone had said it, out loud, in public, and people were listening. But the Braxtons weren't quiet either. Their PR team launched a counter-campaign. They painted Julian as a young man under stress, targeted unfairly by an unstable employee. They cited Elise's emotional fragility and impulsive behavior. They leaked personal details, photos, schedules, gossip. The goal was simple: discredit, destroy, dismiss. But the tactic backfired, because in trying to erase Elise, they only made her story louder. And when a second anonymous email arrived, this time with a video clip of Julian insulting another crew member on a different flight, calling her airborne help, the narrative began to tilt. Public opinion was shifting. The lawsuit had awakened something deeper than a scandal. It had lit a match under a system. And Elise Monroe was no longer alone. She was becoming a symbol, not of defiance, but of quiet boundaries finally being enforced, of dignity saying no more, and across the country, something was building. A storm of voices, a call for accountability, and a reckoning no amount of money could stop. The story didn't explode. It spread, not with fire, but with gravity, like something true enough to tug quietly at people's attention, then pull harder the more they looked away. Elise Monroe's voice wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable, and now it was echoing. 2 days after the radio interview aired, the first email arrived, then a second, then 12 more, then an anonymous Dropbox folder filled with redacted employee complaints, screenshots of threatening text messages, and a handful of incident reports that had somehow never reached the FAA. Each one followed a similar thread: same name, same passenger, Julian Braxton, different flights, different crew, different cities, same tone, same pattern, same corporate indifference. He had been reported before, many times, and every time the outcome had been the same: silence, until Elise slapped him. That was the moment the world paid attention. That was the moment the Whisper Network cracked wide open. Marisa Chen's inbox was overwhelmed. Crew members from 3 airlines reached out. A retired pilot forwarded a statement he'd once tried to submit about an elite passenger whose presence changed the air in the cabin. A young Latina attendant recounted being called air furniture on a LuxAir flight 2 years prior. Another said Julian had mocked her accent. One said he spit on the floor and demanded it be cleaned. None of them had spoken before. Now they were lining up to be heard. Elise watched it unfold from her living room. She didn't speak to the press. She didn't post. She just listened. And in the quiet of her kitchen, she felt something strange. Power. Not the kind that shouts, the kind that ripples. She walked Caleb to school each morning, like always. She cooked simple meals. She folded laundry, and in the back of her mind, she tracked the movement she'd accidentally begun. The phone rang again. "Marisa, they're scared," she said. "I've heard from 3 LuxAir insiders. Legal is scrambling. They didn't expect this. They expected me to vanish." Elise replied, "They're still trying." That evening, a smear article appeared in a minor tabloid painting Elise as emotionally erratic, suggesting a history of disciplinary issues that never existed. Quoting unnamed sources who implied instability, it was predictable, and Elise knew what came next. The calls, the offers, the payoff. It came by courier. A sealed envelope, hand-delivered to her door, inside a revised non-disclosure agreement, this time with a settlement offer attached. $2.5 million, a small fortune. Enough to erase every financial fear, enough to change Caleb's life, enough to disappear with, and all she had to do was shut up. The offer made her stomach turn, not because it wasn't tempting, but because it meant they still didn't understand. They thought she wanted revenge. She didn't. She wanted to be seen. She wanted every woman who'd ever been spoken down to at 40,000 feet to be able to look up and know someone, somewhere, had said no. That night, she sat at the kitchen table, the check in front of her. Caleb came in quietly, sat across from her, and looked at it. "Is that real?" he asked. "Very. Are you taking it?" She looked at him. His eyes were wide but steady, just like his father's used to be. "I want to," she said honestly. "God, I want to. But if I do, the story ends. And if you don't, they try harder to ruin me." He nodded, thought for a long moment. "Then don't sign it," he said. She smiled, just a little. "You sure I'd rather have a broke mom who speaks the truth than a rich one who vanishes." That line stayed with her. The next morning, she mailed the check back. 2 days later, she was served another legal threat. This time, the Braxtons filed for a gag order in court. They wanted to block further reporting, freeze the leak, stop the hemorrhage, but it was too late. A former LuxAir VP had come forward anonymously to Marisa. He confirmed the cover-ups. He described a culture of deference to wealth so extreme it bordered on worship. He confirmed that Julian had been protected, repeatedly. The story aired nationally, and then it happened. The movement found a name. Skybound No More. It started as a hashtag, a place for crew to post their experiences. But it quickly grew into a digital wildfire. Attendants, stewards, pilots, and even ground staff from dozens of airlines shared their stories of mistreatment, disrespect, and dangerous passengers who bought silence with status. Elise's name wasn't always mentioned, but her story hovered at the edge of every post. She became a symbol not of rebellion, but of boundary. And the Braxtons. They weren't winning anymore. Victor Braxton made a rare public appearance to denounce the online harassment of his son. But the backlash was immediate. Where was that energy when your son mocked workers on flights? Why are there dozens of complaints against him and zero accountability? Why did a woman have to slap your son before anyone believed her? Then came the press conference. Elise didn't plan it. It wasn't flashy, just a podium outside a community legal center and a borrowed microphone. No suit, no script, just her. She spoke for 7 minutes. She didn't name Julian. She didn't curse the airline. She didn't make threats. She told the truth. About the moment. About the years before it. About the line between service and submission. And about why she chose to say no quietly, clearly, and yes, with an open hand. The clip was posted online. It went viral. Again, the lawsuits didn't disappear, but public support began to shift the dynamic. Offers of legal aid poured in. A prominent civil rights attorney offered to represent Elise pro bono. A GoFundMe raised over $300,000 in a week. Workers' unions issued statements of solidarity. LuxAir was forced to respond. They released a tepid statement promising an internal review of safety and reporting procedures. No apology, no admission, just optics. But behind the scenes, the airline was bleeding, charter bookings dropped, partners pulled out, and at the next shareholder meeting, Victor Braxton's name was openly questioned for the first time in the company's history. It wasn't justice, not yet, but it was motion. And for the first time in a long time, Elise felt herself breathe differently. She was tired, worn, still waiting for the next attack, but something inside her had changed. Not hardened, just clarified. She was no longer just a former flight attendant. She was a story they couldn't shut down, and the skies would never feel quite the same again. The walls of the Braxton Empire were made of glass and steel. They had always looked invincible from the outside, flawless in design, untouchable in scale. But what no one had seen, until now, was how hollow those walls had become, and how fast they could crack. The first public fracture appeared in a quarterly investor's call. Victor Braxton, seated at the head of a mahogany table, had just begun reading a carefully prepared statement. He wore a navy suit, silver cufflinks, the calm of a man used to being obeyed. But there was something in his eyes that day, a flicker of something he hadn't shown before. Fatigue or fear. LuxAir remains committed to the highest standards of privacy, discretion, and professionalism. He began. Recent media speculation does not reflect the values we uphold. We will not allow one incident to define our legacy. A pause, then a voice from the back. Which part of your values include silencing employees? Everyone turned. It wasn't a reporter, it was a shareholder. A woman in her 60s, sharp-eyed, holding a folder of printed screenshots, tweets, news clippings, complaint files. "I've flown LuxAir for over a decade," she said, "and I believed in your image. But now I'm seeing something else. I'm seeing a company more afraid of the truth than of injustice." Victor tried to recover. "This isn't the forum." "It is exactly the forum," she interrupted. Others began nodding. And just like that, the control Victor had spent years perfecting began to unravel. Outside, media outlets picked up the exchange instantly. The clip went viral. Again, Elise Monroe's story wasn't fading, it was accelerating. Inside the Braxton inner circle, panic simmered. Julian had gone quiet. Publicly, he had issued a carefully worded apology, clearly drafted by lawyers expressing regret for any misunderstanding and deep respect for all airline staff. But the damage was done, because silence had a cost. And now people were speaking. Another former employee came forward. This time, It wasn't about Julian, it was about Victor. A private security contractor described multiple incidents where Victor ordered cover-ups after in-flight confrontations, verbal harassment, staff terminations, payments to silence uncomfortable truths. Each accusation chipped away at the armor, and behind closed doors, Arthur Voss, the fixer, delivered a bitter truth to Victor's face. We can't control the narrative anymore. You built this company on reputation. But now that name is radioactive. Victor stood slowly, walked to the window of his penthouse office, and looked down at the city skyline. "I've survived worse," he said. "No," Arthur replied carefully. "You've buried worse. This won't stay buried." Meanwhile, Elise sat in a cafe across town with Marissa Chen, watching the morning news scroll across the TV. Braxton under fire pressure mounts for accountability in LuxAir scandal. A graphic showed Victor's face next to Elise's. She stirred her coffee quietly. "This isn't what I wanted," Elise said. "I know," Marissa replied. "I didn't want him destroyed. I just wanted them to stop pretending we were invisible." "Well," Marissa said, "you reminded them that we're not." There was a beat of silence. Then Elise asked the question that had been building in her mind for days. "Do you think he'll come after me harder?" Marissa didn't answer right away. "Maybe. But now, if he does, the whole world is watching." That afternoon, Elise received a phone call, not from a stranger, from Captain Miranda Keller. "Elise," Miranda said, voice steadier than expected, "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For not staying quiet, for not letting them make you small. I didn't feel brave." "That's how I know you were." Elise blinked back the emotion that caught her off guard. "Things are changing," Miranda added. "LuxAir won't admit it yet, but they've already started rewriting their internal policy manuals. HR is scrambling to patch the holes. There's even talk of mandatory consent training for high-tier passengers." Elise almost laughed. "That's something. It's not enough," Miranda said. "But it's more than there was. And that's because of you." That night, Elise sat on her porch. Caleb joined her, earbuds dangling around his neck. "Your name was trending again," he said. "Is that good or bad? I don't know." He admitted, "But it's loud." He hesitated, then added, "Some of my classmates think you're a hero." Elise shook her head. "I'm not. You stood up when everyone else sat down. That's kind of the definition." She reached for his hand, held it gently. "I didn't mean to become anything. I just wanted to be treated like a person." "You are," Caleb said. "You are." The next morning, an op-ed appeared in the New York Ledger. The title was simple: "What the Slap Said." It wasn't written by Elise. It wasn't written by Marissa. It was written by a retired airline executive who had once hired Elise fresh out of training school. A man who had quietly watched LuxAir grow more arrogant, more elite, more detached from the humanity of its own staff. In the article, he wrote, "That slap was not an act of violence. It was an act of interruption. It stopped a narrative mid-sentence. It reminded the world that even the most invisible among us carry weight, presence, and power. It was a punctuation mark in a story that needed rewriting." The article went viral. A week later, a congressional subcommittee announced plans to investigate private airline labor practices, beginning with LuxAir. The dominoes kept falling. Elise's legal case was still active, but public sentiment had shifted dramatically. Major labor unions were now involved. A crowdfunding campaign for her legal defense topped $500,000. Multiple prominent lawyers offered to join her case. Victor Braxton, under increasing scrutiny, released a final public statement. He announced his resignation as CEO, effective immediately. The room Elise was in went quiet as she saw the news alert. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She just sat still, because something inside her had landed. Not triumph, not relief, just peace. A peace she hadn't felt since that moment on the plane, since the world froze on the tarmac. She went to the window. The sky was clear, the wind gentle, the air finally light. Not because the fight was over, but because she had found her footing. And once you stand up, really stand up, no one gets to make you small again. Elise Monroe walked into the hearing room with steady breath and measured steps. The chairs were arranged in a tidy semicircle, the kind reserved for people who usually didn't expect to be listened to. At the front sat a panel of lawmakers and advisors, nameplates gleaming under fluorescent lights. C-SPAN's silent cameras loomed in the corners. This wasn't her world. It was a place of crisp suits and procedural language. But she stood out in all the right ways, dignified, calm, clear-eyed. She wore a simple navy dress, no designer logo, no dramatic flair, just Elise, unmasked, standing in her truth. The hearing wasn't supposed to include her at first. It had been called to discuss labor protections for airline crews, but public demand shifted the agenda. Elise's name came up in every article, every op-ed, every tweet. And, eventually, someone on the subcommittee had the courage to say what the country was already thinking. We need to hear from her. A hush fell as her name was called. She stood, walked slowly to the table, sat before the microphone, took a breath, and spoke. My name is Elise Monroe. I was a flight attendant for 18 years. I loved my job. I did it well. I served thousands of passengers from every walk of life. But one day I said no. No to disrespect. No to silence. No to the idea that money gets to erase humanity. She paused. The room was silent. I didn't strike someone because I lost control. I struck someone because I found it. For one brief moment, I refused to be made small. She lifted her eyes and looked directly at the committee. I'm not asking for vengeance. I'm asking for dignity to be non-negotiable. One of the lawmakers, a woman in her 60s, nodded slowly. Ms. Monroe, your story has opened a national conversation. What do you believe needs to change? Elise didn't look down at her notes. She didn't need them. There needs to be a national crew abuse registry, she said. Just like passengers are tracked for safety violations, airlines should be required to document and share records of abusive flyers. There were murmurs in the room and consequences. She continued, not just for staff, for passengers, too. Being wealthy doesn't make someone above the rules. It doesn't give them a free pass to harm others. She leaned in. And the system has to protect the people doing the work, not just the people buying the tickets. The room held its breath. When she stepped away from the microphone, it wasn't applause she received, it was something better. Stillness, a collective moment of respect. When the hearing ended, several aides approached her quietly, thanking her. Some whispered that their own sisters or mothers had worked in service industries. One, a young man in a sharp gray suit, looked her in the eye and simply said, "Thank you for making my mom's story matter." Back outside, the sunlight caught her face, warm and open. Reporters clustered nearby, but she didn't stop for them. She walked straight to the bench across from the reflecting pool and sat down. Marisa Chen joined her a few minutes later, iced coffee in hand. "You just changed the temperature in that room," Marisa said. "I don't know about that," Elise replied, "but I said what I needed to say. You said what everyone needed to hear." They sat in silence for a moment, watching ducks skim the surface of the water. Marisa finally asked, "What comes next for you?" Elise thought about it. "I don't want to be famous," she said. "I don't want to be a brand. I just want to build something better." For the next Elise, the one who's still biting her tongue in the back of a galley somewhere? Marisa nodded. "You've got a platform now. What will you do with it?" Elise smiled gently. "Share it." Later that week, Elise was invited to speak at a labor conference in Chicago, then a university ethics panel, then a virtual town hall hosted by a major airline union. She didn't pretend to have all the answers, but she had the truth, and people listened. She founded an initiative with a few other former crew members, the Quiet Cabin Project. It was a digital platform where airline staff could report abuse anonymously, access mental health support, and share stories without fear of retaliation. It wasn't a revolution overnight, but it was a beginning. The public slowly came to see her not as a woman who slapped a billionaire's son, but as a mirror, reflecting back a system too long tilted toward the powerful. Victor Braxton, meanwhile, faded into shadow. His resignation had not stopped the questions. Congressional oversight into LuxAir's labor history revealed dozens of suppressed complaints, all quietly settled with non-disclosure agreements. The company issued an apology, but no one really heard it. They were listening to Elise. Julian Braxton remained silent. A few blurry paparazzi photos showed him leaving a wellness retreat in the Alps. No interviews, no public statement. His name, once whispered in awe, had curdled into discomfort. And Elise, she found work again, not in the sky, but on the ground, leading training seminars on emotional resilience for frontline workers, speaking softly, clearly, with the same patience she once used to calm passengers at 30,000 feet. She was offered book deals, podcast appearances, endorsements. She turned most of them down. She didn't want to be consumed. She wanted to contribute. On the one-year anniversary of the flight, she returned to Ashcroft Executive Airfield. The Onyx terminal had been remodeled, new management, new policies, a new code of conduct posted by the entrance. Inside, she stood quietly at Gate 3, the spot where it had all begun. She closed her eyes and let the moment come, the fear, the tension, the weight of that decision. And then she opened her eyes and let it go. As she turned to leave, she spotted a young woman behind the counter, wearing a fresh LuxAir uniform, hair neatly pinned, nervous energy in her stance. Their eyes met for just a second, and Elise nodded. The girl smiled back, unsure why, but something passed between them, a thread, a promise, that someone had walked before her, and someone would walk after. Elise stepped into the sunlight, not a heroine, not a victim, just a woman who had once stood still on a runway of silence and chose to say, "Not this time, not again." Elise Monroe didn't ask to become a movement, but sometimes movements aren't born from grand speeches or orchestrated protests. Sometimes they begin with a single moment, a hand raised not in fury, but in refusal. A silence broken not to shout, but to speak what had long been unspeakable. And once it's out there, you can't pull it back in. The Quiet Cabin Project, once a modest resource hub, had become something far larger. Stories flooded in from around the world. Flight attendants in Manila, gate agents in Toronto, pilots in Johannesburg. They spoke different languages, wore different uniforms, worked under different skies, but their stories carried the same tone. Invisible labor, dignity denied, grace mistaken for weakness. Elise read every submission. Some were only a sentence long. He told me to smile or he'd report me. She made me hold her baby while she took selfies in first class. He grabbed my wrist because I didn't pour his scotch fast enough. Others were pages long, each one a slow unburdening of years spent holding back tears mid-service, stories of being yelled at, touched without consent, blamed for turbulence, condescended to with a smile, and worst of all, ignored. What Elise had done, without ever meaning to, was give them language, a way to describe that unbearable weight of being both visible and disregarded, watched, judged, but never truly seen. One day, a message arrived from a senior flight attendant in Sao Paulo. She wrote, "I've worked 32 years. I never once stood up to the powerful. I thought doing so would cost me everything, and it might still. But after I read your story, I filed a report I should have filed 10 years ago. I don't know what will happen, but I finally feel like I'm not alone." That message undid Elise, not because it praised her, but because it reminded her that solidarity isn't a chorus, it's a chain reaction. Soon, a group of airline staff in Atlanta organized a small gathering in honor of Flight Crew Visibility Week. It wasn't about protest, no signs, no shouting, just people standing together in their uniforms, silent, hands clasped behind their backs. They held the pose for exactly 62 seconds, the length of the video in which Elise slapped Julian Braxton. By the following week, the action had spread in Seoul, in Frankfurt, in Nairobi, in New York. Flight crews paused for 62 seconds in lounges, at gates, even on the tarmac. Some passengers joined, others simply watched. The media dubbed it the silent shift. Elise watched footage of it with Caleb one night, seated on their worn living room couch. The glow of the TV was soft on his face. He didn't say much, just leaned his head on her shoulder as the screen filled with images of workers standing still. Proud. Still. Together. "You think he saw this?" Caleb asked. Julian. "Yeah. I don't know," she replied. "I don't think it matters anymore." Caleb turned toward her. "I think it does. Not for him, but for every other rich kid who watched him get away with stuff for years. They're seeing him fall. That changes things." Elise thought about that, about how systems don't always collapse from the outside. Sometimes they crumble when the people inside them stop pretending. She got a call the next morning from an unfamiliar number. It was Arthur Voss, Victor Braxton's former fixer. "Elise," he said, his voice more weary than sharp now. "I know I'm the last person you expected to hear from. I'm not calling on behalf of anyone. Not LuxAir, not the Braxtons, just myself." Elise didn't respond right away. He continued, "I saw your speech at the Labor Summit. You've changed more in 6 months than I did in 30 years of strategy." She finally spoke. "What do you want?" "Arthur, I want to help fix what I helped break." He explained that he'd stepped down from his post after Victor's resignation, that he'd begun consulting on ethics reform, that, for the first time, he was interested in doing something real. "Would you meet with me?" he asked. "Why?" because systems only change when the people who built them admit they got it wrong. And I want to be able to say I did that, in front of you." There was a long pause. Then Elise said quietly, "One meeting." They met in a neutral setting, a library conference room, no cameras, no press, just a table, 2 chairs, and years of unspoken truth between them. Arthur was grayer now. He looked thinner, worn in a way Elise recognized. "I've spent decades silencing people like you," he said, "and I thought that made me clever, professional. But watching you speak, it made me realize that all I did was help powerful men stay weak." Elise nodded once. "Do better," she said. "I'm trying." As he slid a folder across the table, she tensed slightly. Inside were documents, internal communications, legal settlements, memos that proved LuxAir's executives had knowingly protected abusive clients, Julian included. Some pages were redacted, but enough remained to show patterns. "This could help your case," he said, "or the next case." Elise didn't touch the folder right away. "What's the catch?" "There isn't one," Arthur said. "I just don't want to carry this anymore." When Elise finally opened the file, she realized something that both frightened and freed her. This was never just about her, and it never had been. That night, she sat by the window, folder on her lap, Caleb asleep upstairs. She watched a jet lift off in the distance. The sound faded into the night sky. She whispered to herself, not with triumph, but with quiet clarity, "This is bigger than the slap." She picked up her pen and began writing. Not a book, not a press release, but a letter. To every crew member who had written her. To every worker who had stayed quiet. To every person who had ever stared down a powerful name and felt powerless. She wrote, "You are not invisible. You never were. They just needed you to believe you were, so they could stay comfortable. But not anymore. Your silence does not serve them. It starves them. And your story, your real, human, cracked and breathing story is what breaks the cycle. Let them see you. Let them hear you, and never shrink to fit the sky." Elise Monroe stood at the edge of the runway just before dawn, the horizon glowing pale pink. The Falcon X-9 sat in its new gate, its polished surface reflecting the rising sun. Everything looked the same. But nothing was. She had returned to Ashcroft Executive Airfield not as a flight attendant, but as someone who had rewritten the unwritten rules of the skies. The quiet cabin project had flourished into an international coalition for aviation workers. New policies, regulations, and training modules were rolling out. Airlines that once dismissed complaints were now required to log them publicly. Some called it progress. Others said the system was just learning to breathe again. Elise breathed deeply, the cool air filling her lungs. She felt the weight of every story she'd carried, the whispered confessions from behind service counters, the tears held back during in-flight emergencies, the late-night messages from attendants too afraid to speak until now. Those stories had led her here. A figure emerged from the shadows. Captain Miranda Keller, dressed in her uniform, looked tired but proud. She approached with measured steps. "You're early," Miranda said softly. Elise smiled. Couldn't sleep. They stood together, looking at the jet. The silence felt comfortable now, no longer heavy with tension. "Thought about flying again?" Miranda asked. Elise shook her head. "It's his ship now." She nodded toward the jet. "And mine is something else." Miranda studied her. "You ready?" Elise glanced at the terminal. Workers in new uniforms were gathering for an opening ceremony to mark the start of Aviation Workers Solidarity Week. Elise had been invited as the keynote speaker. She had once dreaded attention. Now she embraced it as a chance to lift others. "I am." They walked toward the terminal entrance. Inside, a modest stage had been set up with a simple podium bearing the Quiet Cabin Project logo. The audience included flight crews, union leaders, regulators, and curious travelers. A hush fell as Elise took the stage. She adjusted the microphone, letting it settle. Then she looked out at the faces before her, some familiar, others strangers bonded by shared experience. "Good morning," she began. Her voice was calm, even, resonant. "When I first stepped onto a jet, I believed I was invisible. My role was to serve, to anticipate, to remain unseen." She paused. "Then one day, I said no. In that moment, I wasn't just defending myself. I was defending every person who had ever been silenced by power." Her words carried the weight of every flight attendant who'd ever endured disrespect in silence. The audience leaned in. "Since then, we've built something enduring. A registry of passenger misconduct so no one else has to suffer in secret. Support networks and mental health resources so no one has to bear the cost alone. And a community that refuses to shrink when the skies try to compress us." She scanned the crowd, grateful for their solidarity. But the work isn't done. Her tone sharpened with conviction. "This week, I call on every airline, every regulator, every passenger to commit to one thing. Dignity is never optional. Respect is not a courtesy, it's a requirement. When we cross those lines for money, for status, for convenience, we risk more than hurt feelings. We risk lives, trust, and the very fabric of our shared journey." A ripple of applause swelled. Elise allowed herself a small nod of thanks, then continued. "I stand here not because of a slap heard around the tarmac. I stand here because that moment revealed a system built on silence. And today, we refuse to be silent." She stepped back as the audience rose in standing ovation. Tears glistened in many eyes. Workers who once labored unseen, now celebrated. After the ceremony, Elise mingled. Ground crew members thanked her. Captains shared stories of how policies had already changed. Regulators spoke of new legislation inspired by her testimony. Journalists asked for sound bites. She gave them truth. As the event wound down, Miranda found her again. "You killed it." Elise laughed softly. "I just spoke my truth." Miranda touched her arm. "You gave me the courage to speak up, too." Elise's heart warmed. In that moment, she realized the cycle had shifted. No longer was she alone at the end of a galley. She was part of a chain of voices. A buzz in her pocket signaled a message. It was Marisa Chen, just aired. Your closing comments on national news. They called it a revolution in the skies. Elise exhaled. Then, let's keep flying. That evening, at home, she sat on the porch with Caleb. The sky shifted from pink to deep blue, stars emerging like distant beacons. "You were amazing today," he said, leaning against her shoulder. "Thank you." She stroked his hair. "We did it together." He smiled. "So, what now?" Elise looked up at the stars. "Now, we keep going. We stay the course. Because boundary doesn't end with one fight. It's a promise we make again and again." Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "Promise." Back inside, Elise drafted an email to her Quiet Cabin Project Board. Agenda items: expand the registry internationally, partner with mental health organizations, Host an annual solidarity gathering. Bullet points flowed into paragraphs fueled by ambition and humility. She stopped and read the first sentence. We ride the momentum of a single moment to build something that lasts. She leaned back, eyes closing. That slap the flashpoint had set everything in motion. It had cost her her job, her peace, her certainty, but it had given her something greater purpose shaped by principle. In the quiet of her study, she picked up a framed photo of Terrence and young Caleb on a picnic blanket under a clear sky. The compass pendant around her neck glinted in the lamplight. She touched it gently. He had guided her true north. And now, she guided others. Later, as she prepared for bed, a message pinged on her phone. From Arthur Voss. To the woman who reminded me what integrity looks like, thank you. She typed back, we all find our way eventually. As she laid down to sleep, her mind drifted to the future flights she would never serve personally, but whose crews she would support, to the policies she would help enact, to the next generation of airline workers who would never doubt their worth in the sky. And she slept, peaceful at last, knowing that a single moment of refusal had set the world in motion and that the flight was far from over. Elise Monroe's moment of courage reminds us that dignity isn't negotiable and that even the quietest voices can ignite a global reckoning. As we close this chapter, let her story linger in your heart, a testament to compassion, an indictment of entitlement, and a celebration of every person who dares to say, not this time. If her struggle resonated with you, if it stirred empathy or outrage, honor it by standing up in your own life, whether on the tarmac or beyond. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you believe in justice, respect, and solidarity, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps the conversation alive and fuels the next story. Together, we'll keep challenging the status quo and proving that real change begins when we refuse to stay silent. Stay tuned for more stories that demand your attention and inspire your voice.